Okay, I'm going to call the meeting to order. And let's
Steve,
see.
would you please speak up and into the microphone?
Yeah, I got to turn it on.
Thank you.
Is that good? Okay. I'm going to call, whether you're here or not, Leslie,
Present.
Niall, Mitchell,
Present.
David, Darian,
Here.
Renka, myself, Steve Gill. I get a motion to approve the agenda.
Motion to approve.
A second?
Second.
Anyone opposed? Great. Any brief comments from staff? Anybody up here? Any in-person, any public comments?
We have not received any.
Okay. Let's move on to the consent items then. And there's only one. That would be approving the minutes from the last meeting. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
A second?
Second.
Anyone opposed? Passed. Again, any public comment? Great. Regular items.
I forgot about the microphone myself, so I apologize for that. All right. So, the commissioners, you received your presentation about more of an overall California financial kind of revenue presentation from Michael Coleman last meeting. And so this time around, we're going to be more focused on the major revenue sources that are within the city of Davis. So we'll go through, I don't have that many slides, we'll go through, and then at the end we can do questions, discussions, and any comments that you will have. All right, so first we'll do an overview for the general fund. So general fund is the largest fund for the city. And when I say largest fund is, I'm referring to discretionary fund. So the money that comes in here, revenues, could be used just about for anything that City Council determines is needed for the city, whatever the goals and objectives are. So this summary gives you our largest revenue sources, well, total, but identifies each individual line by major source. So, to no surprise, our largest revenue source related to property tax type revenue. That particular line item includes 3 items. The regular property tax that we receive from the county. You may or may not be familiar, I'm not sure if Michael talked about it, but RPTTF, which is a redevelopment property tax trust fund, when redevelopment agency got dissolved, we received a portion now of those, what they call a waterfall proceeds, and it becomes general fund money, as well as motor vehicles in lieu taxes. So all of those are captured as property taxes in that line item, and it's the largest revenue source for the city. The second line you see is sales tax and transactions and use tax, and it's combined in one line item here, but as we go through, you'll see a graph that actually breaks them out. And then we have some other individual taxes, which we'll go through in a few minutes as well. And I do want to point out that we have about $61 million of tax-related revenues in total, which is all the line items except the last 2. The last 2 line items include our investment income, any other revenues that we may have, reimbursements, donations that people making, things like that. And a line item that we call program revenues, and those are related specifically to various programs. And when I say programs, I mean things like parks and community services, right? So they have recreation fees and things like that, rents that might be specific to facilities for their recreational use. We may have things like fees that we charge, so permits for engineering, for community development related activities. So those are captured as program revenues because they are supporting, it's a fee usually, so we can make money on it, it just supports that particular program, and the cost, it's in essence, ends up being either cost recovery or under cost recovery item. So moving on down, so this is the breakdown of the property tax and motor vehicles in lieu. So as you can see for us, property tax is fairly flat. It goes up with, as you know, should not go up more than 2%. Sometimes it does go up higher, but the reasons are we build new homes, right? So the assessed value grows from new housing and therefore it will go up higher. The other reasons sometimes, as you may be aware with Prop 13, as you live in your house, the property values can, for your home while you live there, can go up only up to 2% a year. But as soon as you sell it to somebody else, that market value is captured and assessed value grows, and therefore we get a greater percentage or a greater dollar amount now collected in property taxes. With motor vehicles in lieu, which I'm sure you may have talked about at the last meeting, that one was pretty much a frozen amount, and it grows with the almost in the same way, almost not exactly, but almost in the same way as the property taxes. And so it's pretty stable, and yes, it does go up, but it doesn't normally fluctuate or grows in a very various, I guess, percentages. So it's just pretty stable. Moving on to sales tax and transactions and use tax. So this was prepared before yesterday, or before any results, although uncertified. So at this point we have 1% Bradley Burns tax, which is a sales tax, sales and use tax, and we have transactions and use tax, and that's the what we call a local 1% tax. With uncertified results, it appears that the citizens approved an additional 1%, so that amount will grow. And as you can see, the green bar is the local tax and the blue bar is the Bradley Burns 1%. Taxes, sales taxes, and transaction use taxes are collected through CDTFA, California Department of Fees, Tax and Fee Administration. So we contract with them, we have no choice over that, and so they do the collection and they disperse the funds to us. I will say, I'm not sure, you may have had this discussion, but sales tax always come in late, because by the time it's collected by the business, they have 30 days to disperse the funds to CDTFA or to the state, and then they still have time to process it, and then they give it to the city. So we're always 2 to 3 months behind, depends on how it works. So the way it's paid to the city, we receive 2 advances. So first 2 months in the quarter, we get advanced payments. And then the third one is, they call it a cleanup payment. So that totals up and trues up what the total quarter payment is. So, but we usually don't know about those, sometimes up to at least 2 months later, okay? So the largest, so the difference is how the tax is collected. My preferred example is I usually like to talk about when you buy a car. We have gone into more details of that with Michael as to how it's collected. So if you have any additional questions, I'm happy to try and describe it. But as of right now, in this current year, we expect to collect about close to $12 million in local tax and about $8.5 million for the Bradley Burns tax.
And that difference, and that has to do with the origin and destination.
That's correct, that's part of it. There's other things that happen, but yes, that's generally is that. And that's why I was referring that I usually like to use an analogy of a car when you purchase a car. Regardless if you buy it in the city, at the dealership here, or if you're buying it outside of the city, part of the reason why the dealer usually would ask is, well, it depends on how much you need to pay because it depends on where you live. So if there's a transaction and use tax, then they apply that even if you're purchasing that car outside of the city limits. So it's based on the destination in that case, right? So where you garage the car or keep your car, register your car, and not where you buy it. So the way it works, let's say groceries, right? If you go and buy groceries here in Davis, you pay your Bradley Burns 1% and you pay your 1% local tax, and it stays here. Let's say you go and buy your groceries in Woodland, and I'm not sure if they have local tax, but let's pretend they do. So if you go and buy groceries there, that 1% Bradley Burns and local tax is going to stay in Woodland because they don't ask you, okay, well, where do you live? Okay, so we lose out on those taxes in some cases, or sometimes other stores, retail stores and things like that. But there are some items like online purchases is one of them, or things like, depends, like dealership cars, which are usually fairly a large component of this transaction and use tax. When somebody who lives in Davis buys a car outside of Davis, call it Sacramento or Roseville, when you go and you say, my car is going to be registered in Davis, they will collect the Bradley Burns 1%, and that's going to go to the city you purchased the car in, or county, I guess, in some cases, right? But the 1% local tax will be sent to the city of Davis. So we lose out on the Bradley Burns sales tax, but we do get the local tax, which a lot of the times why our transaction and use tax revenue is higher, because we get the benefit of it being collected and sent to the city of Davis. I hope that makes sense. I'm happy to answer more questions if need be, but that's generally how the mechanics of it would work. So our other taxes that we collect are business license, transient occupancy tax, and cannabis. Business license generally is pretty standard for us, and it doesn't fluctuate too much except when we have COVID. So it dropped quite a bit at the time, but then it recovered at this point already. So it grows a little bit each year because we do have a COLA built in. So it goes in a little bit, but overall, this is a type of a tax that would have to be approved by voters if we want to change it. And our business license tax ordinance is pretty old. And quite outdated, I would say, particularly when it comes to description of businesses and things like that. So it's not exactly the current age. If you were to look probably around the state at the last election, there were a number of cities that did put out a business license tax update for exactly the purposes, because they're old, outdated, and they're trying to bring it to current. So in order for us to do it, we would have to take it to the voters. Okay. Transient occupancy tax, the city is collecting 12%. So anyone who is staying in the hotels, or let's say they do Airbnb, that tax is also collected. One of the things that I think that's important to note, we also have Visitors Bureau that's collecting 2% additional tax. So that's done through the county, and it goes for the entire county. So even though the city gets 12%, reality is whoever stays in the hotels in Davis really do pay 14%. We don't get to keep the 2%, but we do keep 12%. With cannabis, it's the 6th year for us that we've been collecting it. The first year when it was approved, we received about $650,000. It grew because it was right before COVID when it was approved. Through the COVID, 2 years of COVID, it grew significantly. It went from $650,000 the first year, and it went over $2.5 million, I believe. There you go, 2.8 in 21. So since then, once the COVID was over and people were going back to work, uh, the cannabis tax went down because the sales went down. However, it wasn't just the city of Davis, it was really seen across the state. In addition, for us, we started out with taxing the cannabis at 100%, but then it was brought to our attention and we worked with the city attorney where sales that were made outside of the city, we could not tax at 100%, so we had to give them up to 30% call it credit discount, so that the receipts that were collected from outside of the city, we're only taxing 70% of it. Mainly because of we have no ability to say if an item was sold outside of the city or someone purchased it outside of the city, we can't collect 100% tax on that because it's not ours, it would be the other jurisdiction. Okay. So, and we have administrative ruling on that, and we have it posted on our website. So if you're interested, we can always either pull it up or you're welcome to look at things like that. So, but that's another reason why cannabis tax reduced or dropped a little bit. And overall, in general, we still can't figure out what is the real tax amount that we can collect because it's been fluctuating so much. And so we're still waiting to see for it to stabilize so that we can really determine like, what is the revenue source because it's been fluctuating. So the other taxes we collect besides general taxes, which could be spent on anything, we have some special taxes that we collect. So two that have been approved by the voters are park maintenance tax and open space protection tax. So park maintenance tax, exactly what it's for. I also included the description of what it can be spent on in the staff report that you received. So park maintenance tax, we collect about $1.5 million. It does grow about 2% a year. And that's written in the ordinance when the tax was approved. Our spending, and I mean that by just the parks division budget, as I've included in the staff report, is $8.9 million. So that tax does not come close to covering that. And that does not include spending on, let's say, swimming facilities maintenance, which could be covered by the tax as well. And that does not even include our urban forestry program either. So if we add those, we're significantly over even that amount. So, but it does cover those.
Are these still discretionary though?
No, park maintenance tax is very specific for the purposes of park maintenance, swimming pools, and tree maintenance. Okay. So these are, we call it a special tax. So earlier we talked about large revenue sources from general taxes. These two are very specific to what it could be spent on. The second one, which is again voter approved, was open space protection tax. That one does not have an inflator at all. So it's flat amount every year and it does not change from year to year. And we collect close to 700,000. So the only time it will change if we have any new housing, for example, build or units built, then that would be applied. Other than that, there is no growth.
And what is that spent?
Pardon me?
What's an open space protection project?
So we usually purchase open space areas. So we've purchased in the last couple of years 2 easements called Gill easements. We have it called Gill easement 1 and Gill easement 2. So we've purchased those, and I believe before then there were additional open space areas. So we purchased them, and it's an easement, so nobody can build something on them, so they're strictly set up for an open space, and so you can't do anything with it other than for that purpose. So, and usually we have a tendency to share something like that with the county, so they put in some money if we can. We usually get grants as well for that type of purpose, and so we supplement it with our what we call local money, which is going to be in this case the open space protection.
I was just going to add to that. So that program came into play almost 24 years ago, and it was, again, it was a voter-approved initiative, the Open Space Protection Act.
Okay, and so now we're going more off, a little bit, somewhat off taxes, although we do have a construction tax that was approved a long time ago. And so I'm gonna call it, it's a grandfathered tax, before Prop 218, 26, whatever it was. So at the time when it didn't have to go to the voters, and it was approved by council, so it's very old. So if there's any thought of, okay, well, can we change it or any of that? If that's the case, that would have to go back to the voters. But at this point, that's, I want to call it grandfathered tax. So construction tax, we collect construction tax at the time the permit is issued. So it's a development related, and it's meant to be for, collections to improve city facilities, or assist with improving that. And because it's development related, it fluctuates quite a bit. So we've included 4 years of actual collections for the tax and obviously a projection for fiscal year 25. And as you can see, it goes up and down and as I said, depends on development. So in the development depends on the economy or construction costs. So if those go up, and that's what recently happened, we have some projects that may be delayed, and so if we expected to receive a tax, we may not, and so hence the fluctuations. The tax calculation is based on either the square footage or the number of units that are being built. So it's usually, as I said, relates to development in general, usually to the new development, not necessarily always existing. Okay.
How is this revenue restricted, or is it?
It's not really, other than it just says it helps the city with facility maintenance. So it could be used for a variety of purposes, but its intention, I think, is a construction tax, is to assist with facilities. And that's what the city has been using it historically for. So the other revenue source that is development related is development impact fees. So those are literally connected to the developments, and so we have several types of development impact fees, and we try to put them in color to just kind of delineate. So the total bar shows how much we collect in a year, but that bar is then separated into several different sections, and each section represents a type of the fee. So we collect impact fees for general facilities, general city facilities, for open space, for parks, for public safety, and for roadways. So as you can see, again, because it's development related and depending on what projects are coming in, it depends on how much we actually get to collect. A lot of these are capital, it's all capital related, so if we spending funds on projects, it has to mitigate the development that actually ended up paying for these. So hence the development impact fees. So we collect those, as you can see, in 22 we had some projects that ended up being completed. So unlike construction tax, development impact fees are paid at the time of occupancy or final inspection. So one is at the beginning of the project, one is at the end of the project. So as you can see, certain projects were completed in 22-23, so we received quite high dollar amounts, but it slowed down, and some of the projects have been delayed because of construction costs, what the inflation was doing in the economy, and so although we may have budgeted higher numbers, we have not necessarily always received it in that time frame. Okay. So with that, those are the major items that I talked about. I'm happy to answer questions you may have on any particular revenue sources or anything that maybe I've looked at or talked about at the very beginning on the first slide, so it had a little more detail. I'm happy to answer questions on those.
I have a question. On the, as Rebecca pointed out, on the park maintenance tax, it looks like whatever that collects is far lower than the expenditures. Was that unique to 23, 24, or is that sort of consistent?
On the park maintenance, it's been consistent. So like I said, park maintenance tax grows 2% a year. The tax rate is usually, it's preset in the ordinance, and so from that date, I believe it was 2018, when the voters reapproved the tax. It went in with a CPI of 2%. So from then on, it's been growing 2% a year. So this is pretty much flat overall, I consider it, that it's been like that. Now, we have, as far as I've been with the city, our tax, parks expenditures have always been a lot higher because we have a lot of parks, we have a lot to maintain, because we maintain medians, landscaping, for the parks, all of that greenery. And we have a number of them. So the expenditures are a lot higher.
So the expenditures are consistently also higher, like, it's not unique to 23, 24?
No.
the expenditures we
No,
have.
that's
The intent of
fairly
the tax
standard.
isn't to cover the full cost.
Pardon me?
The intent of the tax is not to cover the full cost.
Well, that would be nice, but
But
we're
that-
far from that,
yeah.
yes.
So the rest comes out of the general fund, and then the park tax sort of is a, like, supplement to?
Correct, yes. So other general taxes, property tax, sales tax, cover the remaining costs. That's correct.
I've got some general questions, and they're more about how you think about this decisioning and whatnot. So if we look at a table like this, it shows the actuals, and understand they're not audited. But do we have a feel for how well we're able to forecast? So say 2 years out, 1 year out, how do our estimates compare to the ultimate actual, and what are we good at, and what could we have a harder time estimating?
So the two largest revenue sources, property tax and sales tax and transaction use tax, we actually utilize assistance of consultants. So HDL, that's our consultant that does the work for us in terms of meeting with us quarterly and talking about sales tax or annual and property tax, because that doesn't really change as much. They also assist us with projections. Property taxes were traditionally pretty right on what the projections were and estimates that they provided, so we utilize them. Sales tax, we usually hit pretty close, but we don't always know what might happen. So for example, biggest one was during COVID, everyone's expectation was the sales taxes were going to drop. Instead, all the people stayed home, got extra money, went and spent it. So that went the other way, right? So, which was completely opposite of expectation, because the idea was, okay, well, what if we go into a recession now? Everyone, maybe a number of people were losing jobs, all of a sudden you have to stay home. What's going to happen, right? And it went completely the other way. So we've collected a lot more. So those instances, which I would call an anomaly, couldn't predict that, right? So we had to make adjustments as we were going along, because our sales taxes were growing at 20% a year. So that we couldn't necessarily, or didn't know how to predict, nor did our consultants. But generally speaking, they look at just the economy overall, how the state is doing, how the cities overall in the state are doing. And so we've been very close to what the consultants assisted us with. We look at it also from our own perspective, because we know more internally, right? If the dealerships are closed or something is going to open up, we do have those conversations with the consultant, just so they know what's going to happen, or what's coming up. And so they built in into their projections some of those items that we relate to them. So it's been pretty close. Not always 100% on it, but it certainly hasn't really been, other than the anomalies I was telling you about, it hasn't really been far off.
Yeah, I'm not worried about it being far off. Like when council goes through budgeting, do they understand this is how we viewed things 2 years ago? Clearly, we don't have a crystal ball. A year in, when we reforecast, just so that there's sort of a history of where we've done well, where we haven't. And I think what it does is it informs questions about our assumptions and why and whatnot.
So the consultants look at it from a perspective of categories of where the sales taxes are being collected. So they look at the construction category, right? What's going on in the construction industry. They look at autos and transportation. They look at general consumer goods, right? When we go and buy things in grocery stores, right? Things like that. So they actually break it out in greater detail by categories, so all the businesses are then categorized, so they have a category for cannabis, or, retail stores, but discount stores versus the high-end stores, things like that. So they look at it from those perspectives as well, so they do evaluate it on a quarterly basis. Like I said, they work with us. They get the data from the state. And so they evaluate it, and they're not only looking at it from just the city of Davis perspective, they have lots of clients within the state of California and actually outside of the state, which may not necessarily always be relevant to us, but the California state, they have quite a few clients and they have a lot to compare it to. Sometimes we ask questions that may relate to like, okay, well, what about similar? We're not the same, and I'm pretty sure Michael said you can't necessarily always compare cities to other cities. But sometimes we might look and say, okay, well, how we compare to, I don't know, San Luis Obispo, as an example, because they're a college town, right? Things like that. So they may have data on those items as well to kind of give us an idea of how well we're doing, how not well we're doing, where we're missing out on certainly, I don't know, retail places and whatnot. So those are being evaluated, and like I said, we meet quarterly with the consultants on sales tax specifically, so we get an update from them, they hear from us as well.
I just want to kind of add a little bit to what Elena said there as well. She and her group are doing this very close quarterly monitoring. It's very, ongoing. In addition to that, the city uses a long-range financial forecasting model, which is somewhat unique among cities, not widely used, and it actually contains 20-year projections for anticipated revenues and expenditures. That, for me as a council member, is a really useful tool. In particular, it helps me to see certain, what I'll call, humps that we have to get over, that are some things like our unfunded liabilities and other things like that, that are really important. So just to make you aware of that, and probably at some point we'll have Bob Leland come back again and do his presentation, which he hasn't done in a little while, where he steps you through that model and how it works. And you also asked sort of like, does council know, like, as they're making these decisions? And one of the things, the budget and all of the information Elena provides to us, it's very detailed, and sometimes it's easy to get lost in the detail, and you have to step back from it a little bit to compare the prior year, or to do comparisons. But there's also a lot of really helpful, what I find really helpful, summary information in the beginning of the budget. Sometimes you should start there, because that gives you a sense of the trends and what has happened. And she'll have clear statements in there. Oh, our anticipated revenue from X was a little lower than anticipated, and here's why. So that's always a good clue for me, a cue. So I know, okay, as I'm going through these documents, I'm going to look at those things and ask those questions. So these are great questions, so keep them coming.
Great.
I have a couple of my own, but I don't want to step in until you're...
Let me try one more. And then, I appreciate the response. Sales tax. So we have a sales tax revenue that's based on sales. Do we have measures of sort of like sales per capita? It sounds like you have categories of sales or have insight into that. So we can understand, just like you talked about San Luis Obispo. I can never say it right. That other college town. So we get a feel for it, and this really gets to development and whatnot, and forecasting long term, so we can understand what's going on downtown in terms of sales, and are there changing trends in terms of what people are buying? Is it all food because it's a college town, or are there other things? Do you have insights into those?
We have some information, so they do provide us some of the graphs sometimes that might provide you with, particularly when we look at it, we also look at more of a regional, closely regional areas, right? We don't always look at San Luis Obispo, they have a lot of high-end stores, which we don't, so it's a little difficult to compare ourselves to that. Hence why Michael said you really have to be careful when you do that. But we do try to compare ourselves to, surrounding areas, woodland, winters, so on. So we have an idea where we stand, and I can tell you, Davis doesn't have a lot of retail stores, right? So we're pretty low in the totem pole there compared to others. So, but yes, we received some of the data, not in the great detail. I mean, they don't go through specific businesses and whatnot, unless we really have to dig into it, but that's.
But is that available to the development manager and that kind of?
Sales tax information is confidential. So what you will see, and that's one of the things that usually we provide, after we meet with the consultant, they usually give us a, what I would call a sales tax newsletter. And that information that you will have in there is generic enough. There's very certain stipulations in the California Government Code that says what you can and cannot disclose. So, for example, we can't give you a specific business, or if we do disclose, it has to be not just one in the category, things like that. So there's very specific requirements. So the newsletter that we usually, after our quarterly meetings, send out to City Council, Fiscal Commission as well, to the members, you're welcome to read, you're welcome to share that if you'd like, because that information is not confidential. So they've summarized it in ways where that is public, okay? But if somebody just walked off the street and said, I want to look at your sales tax data and I want to see who is paying it, how much they're paying, that is confidential, we're not allowed to disclose that. Yes, but as our Assistant City Manager Stackwitz mentioned, so there's only certain people, and we actually have to file a resolution with CDTFA, with the state, that identifies positions that are allowed to see the detailed data. So our Community Development Director, obviously City Manager's Office, Finance Director, they are allowed to see all the individual information, and they all participate in the quarterly meetings that we actually have.
Great, thank you. Anybody else have any questions? Thoughts?
Just to confirm, with Measure Q adding another 1% to the transaction tax, does that mean the expectation is another $11 million?
Assuming we are continuing to collect the same way as we do, yes, the expectation would be that that green bar is going to be doubled because it's going to be now 2% instead of 1%. But again, the sales tax is more subject to fluctuations in the economy. So if the economy goes down, people may not spend as much, so will the revenue. But yes, it will follow the same way, it's just going to be doubled. And I do want to mention with the new sales tax, which I probably don't have to explain to Commissioner Hain, but we won't actually be able to start seeing the revenue from that until likely May, June timeframe. Because first of all, it won't be effective until April 1st. We have to get into contracts with CDTFA to collect the tax and so on. And so our first dollars will not come in until the end of this fiscal year, and the majority of it will start coming into the new fiscal year.
Anything else?
I have another question, sort of more back into the detail of things. On the general fund summary, I noticed that there's a big jump for investments and other revenues between fiscal year 2021, 22 to 22, 23. And I don't expect you to know every line item, but I'm curious if, off the top of your head, what was the result of the...
So on the investment side, the interest rates started changing. And so the market value, which is actually a non-cash transaction, started fluctuating a lot. And it's a reverse relationship. So it means when interest rates go up, the market value goes down. So because we haven't yet closed the year, so we have yet to post some of the investment income in general and the market value adjustment. So market value adjustment, because it's, sorry, getting into a little more technical accounting side of it, it's a non-cash transaction, and we keep our books generally at a value when we purchase the investment. For accounting record purposes, when we issue financial statement, we actually have to show it at market value. So we have to adjust it for market. So it's sometimes an artificial fluctuation, because when the interest rates were going down, our market value was going up. Again, it's an inverse relationship, right? So part of those you will see is a lot of the market value adjustment, and because we haven't actually finalized it, that particular line item will change for sure.
I don't want to get in an investment conversation, but isn't most of your investment short-term money?
No, not necessarily. So for the government per government code, the cities can invest into securities up to 5 years. They could do 10, but it has to be with council approval. So actually all of the investment that the city holds are all within 5-year time frame. As a matter of fact, we have the investment policy subcommittee, they're going to look at it, I'm sure, but a lot of it is on a shorter duration time, so probably within more like up to 3 years, although we do have a number of investments that go as far as 5.
Thank you. I just want to ask you a question about property tax, since you're here. Do you have a sense, in terms of the property sales, residential property sales that happen in Davis, say in any given year, to what extent are they interfamily transfers, or are they really, true property transfers where the purchaser will be paying property tax based on market value? Do we have any information on those trends?
We usually receive that information on the annual basis, because the county doesn't actually do it all the time, so that's why the roll gets to be equalized as of beginning of the year, January 1st. So anything that happens after is called a supplemental roll. That's where you pay the supplemental tax, property tax, when you buy a home. So those usually we don't have available during the year, but when we meet with our property tax consultant, they provide us with a whole booklet, and that actually information, pretty much a lot of it, if not all of it, is all public. So unlike sales tax, which is confidential, property tax is all public. So so that information is given to us at that time. So, but usually once a year. Also want to add a little bit about property taxes. So if you own a home, you pay the 1% and then other taxes, but 1%. So I just want to clarify, the city doesn't actually get to have the full 1%. We only get a certain percentage of the 1%, which I believe is 33%, I think, 23?
Checking.
Sorry.
I knew it a week ago.
Yeah, so it's weighted. We have quite a few tax areas within the city of Davis. So weighted average is somewhere, I believe, actually 21% for all of them. But it depends on where you actually live in Davis. It might be a little higher, a little lower. But I just wanted to point out, the city doesn't get to have the entire 1%. Each homeowner pays for the ad valorem tax. We only get a share of that.
Again, 21 cents on every dollar you pay in your property tax comes back to the city.
Can I ask you a question? Did I miss, why is it confidential, the sales tax?
It's called, because of businesses and it's proprietary information, so that's not disclosable. Whereas property tax is all available. So it's in the California government code, so can't really go against that. That's our rules and regulations, so part of it.
it's part of the California government code, there's like
Yes.
proprietary.
That's correct.
Do you have anything else, Emma? Last chance? Any public comment? Okay, let's move on then. Subcommittee updates, we don't have any subcommittee members here. Oh, no, take it back, all right.
I have an update. Let me just pull it up. Okay, so this is from Rika and I. We have been meeting with community members to gather their thoughts from the Davis community, values with respect to socially responsible investment policy. We've done outreach with some nonprofits and other cities to understand policy and implementation challenges. We've researched existing policies and what the investments of the city currently look like. And we continue to do all these things so we can provide useful feedback to our council liaisons. Some of the things we've learned so far include that there's a community interest in a variety of different investment streams, from ranging from fossil fuels, weapons manufacturers, and deforestation. There is an interest in updating the city's current investment policy. Among California cities, there's great diversity in policy language and implementation. Implementation of a very restrictive policy could be challenging. This California State Treasurer notes that a policy should keep three goals in mind. First, safety of the principal, followed by meeting liquidity needs, and finally, generating a return. And yeah, that's the update from the socially responsible investments policy subcommittee.
Thank you.
Questions? Did you get any, it sounds, I'm not sure whether you're talking to this type of audience, but,
Steve, will you please use my
I'm
card?
sorry. Any sense of, if we decide to define socially responsible in a particular way, is there a material cost in terms of the return on the investment or the cost to manage the investment?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely projections and other places that have modeled, like, you know, what's the discrepancy between like a benchmark fund versus a ESG or socially responsible fund. So there's what we're thinking right now is to look at what other cities have done to model that, because like I was just reading, we were just looking through Berkeley, which has done a lot of work on this. So that is something that we're going to be thinking about, and it's something that should be made publicly known so that you have an idea of, you know, what the expense is and, you know, are you investing your values or is it worth it, or those kinds of costs analysis.
One of the things that'll happen as this process goes forward, because the subcommittee is kind of doing its preliminary work, and we haven't had, my council colleague and I haven't had a chance yet to circle back with you, but before anything gets comes to where it's actually a recommendation to council, we will certainly work really closely with Elena and her group, because as she, I'll speak for you while you're sitting right here, but she'll make it very clear just how incredibly important it is for her to protect and preserve the assets of the city. That's kind of, as you said, one of the guiding principles. And also that it has to be feasible to implement. And that's sort of one of the discussions that we had when we were first taking it up at council. And Elena was very clear, you know, it's got to be something that our investment advisors and us that we can really follow and it's tangible, because we realized as we were looking at the existing language that in practice it didn't really operate the way the community expected it to, you know, because there was a little bit of a disconnect. So whatever we ultimately recommend, it has to be very tangible, very concrete, very straightforward to implement. And, you know, we'll have many more discussions about it before we go forward. But thank you for your work.
I wonder if there's opportunities to say, these are the type of companies we don't want to invest in. The cost of that is too high. What can we do in lieu of not investing in these companies? So there's an option to sort of make a statement with perhaps less cost.
Yeah, it's definitely, when you read the literature, there's a lot of discussion around the issue of cost and whether undertaking these various socially responsible measures amounts to, how does it tip the scale in terms of cost? Or does it not? And how do you assess cost, right? Is it just monetary, or is it the future and some of those intangibles we're always looking to protect and preserve? So it's a complicated issue, but all, really good points, so, yeah.
Thank you.
I have a question on, more on like the process, I guess, and procedure, maybe for Councilwoman Neville, is how, I guess, would the change go about happening? Is it something that gets approved in the city council meeting, and is there a public hearing, like what's the process?
Yeah, so typically, council takes up the investment policy itself every year. It's required to do that under state law. And usually when we take it up, it's a relatively straightforward item. Maybe there's a change in accounting rules or some minor change, but not usually a lot. So ultimately, any change in policy would be taken up by city council at a public meeting. It's not an item that requires a hearing, as far as I recall. It's just a regular item. But in terms of this process of sort of how this subcommittee works with council, Bapu and I are the subcommittee for city council that's working with your subcommittee. And so we'll have more meetings with you. And ultimately, before you, as a body, you'll make a recommendation. The subcommittee will come forward to you with something once they have it kind of fleshed out. But even before they do that, you'll meet with staff for sure, because that is really one of the key steps, because we want to be sure we bring things into a public meeting that we've really figured out. Is this something that staff can implement? What's their perspective? We really want to make sure that we get that. So that will all happen, and then it will come to you for consideration, and you'll make a recommendation, and then that'll ultimately come to council for its consideration. So, yeah. Good questions.
Any public comment? Long-range calendar. Question. Has the utility team been able to provide a calendar update?
So we've asked them for when they may be able to present their items for particular funds that they have in mind. And their dates, or really months that they provided, were March, April, and June. So those, I will say, will be quite heavy, because sometime starting March, well, for finance department, it will be a lot earlier, but by the time it comes to the commission and council, the heavy months will be for us from March to June. That's when the budget is happening. So generally, either last meeting of March, beginning of April, first meeting of April is when we're bringing up the mid-year update to the city council. So mid-year would be for the current fiscal year, to see if there are any changes that needed for the budget, how we're doing. So hence mid-year update. And then generally speaking, we have a presentation to council for introduction of a new budget. We do a 2-year budget. So that usually happens towards the end of May. And then there's usually a workshop in case there are questions and things like that, and that's on the council side. And then usually at the end of the month of June is when we bring it to council for adoption. So somewhere within those areas, because council gets to get the budget introduction usually first when it's released, somewhere in there we also need to make sure that we present it to the commission. So the commission is able to review, pose your questions, or ask questions, or, ask for clarifications, things like that, and then before it actually goes to the city council for the final approval. So those timeframes, I'm just giving you a heads up, all will be a little heavy, and because of the timing of the budget, particularly in the introduction, we may need to think about either potentially having longer meetings, or if we need to maybe schedule a special meeting outside of the time, just because the timing may not always work out with the dates when the commission meetings are, which is the first week of the month.
Can we reflect that information in the minutes, sometimes in tabular form, so we can sort of see that?
Yes.
Appreciate it.
Did I hear you correctly? There's 3 rate settings starting, or just 3?
There's 3 sessions that the utilities and operations department said that they would like to have. That doesn't necessarily
Oh,
mean it's
okay.
their rate
Okay,
setting.
I was a little, whoa.
Yeah, yes, but they
Okay.
provide updates on, updates or something that may relate to utility.
Got it. Do you know if we are starting any rate-making proceedings in the next 12 to 18 months?
I have to ask, I'm not.
Because that would be a fairly big deal to know, because
I
then
don't
you have to
believe
really
that.
calendar backwards, and so.
We can find out that.
I think what's coming up is the waste management.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
The storm?
No,
garbage.
Sorry.
Right. Any other comments on scheduling, trying to get a picture here so that we sort of have some foresight on what's coming and.
Well, one of the, I want to add, and Mitchell, I don't want to jump and take your, take your item away, but one of the things that I know that Commissioner Murphy actually suggested or wanted to maybe see, and this is up to the commissioners, all the commissioners, to see if you want to add it to a calendar at some point, but the question was related to infrastructure funding. So I'm not sure specifics, so if you would like to speak to that, that would be probably a good opportunity.
Thank you so much. I was gonna make a comment. So I was wondering if, because I saw that you can see the fiscal projections and the funded and unfunded like liabilities, and about the city's infrastructure, there's like a table, and you can see that there's this X many millions in unfunded liabilities. So I was interested in learning more about where does that funding come from, so that I could understand better for myself. And then I had another comment, but I can wait until after. The other thing I was wondering is, like, this is such a wonderful way of understanding the city's revenue that we had today. And would there be I would be interested in a similar one on our expenses, because there's a great budget document that's like a lot bigger than the presentation you gave today, so which might be easier to understand in a short amount of time, which I think would be really helpful for myself.
And just as a clarification on expenditures, are you looking general fund? Are you looking citywide, particular programs?
Because there's 2, right? There's the general fund aspect of the expenditure, and then there's the whole pie of expenditures. I think the whole thing would be what I would like to know. And it kind of is related to the other one, I mean, because the long term is just the forecast for that going forward.
Anything else?
Oh, just for my clarification, so did we decide that we will get more like a kind of like a plan of what's coming up for the next meetings, or is that already something that we know about, like what we're going to be discussing next time?
So we don't have something yet preset for, let's say, next month's, what will be discussion. So we'll need to figure that part out, unless there's any particular topics that you would like to hear, and we'll have to look and evaluate to see if we're able to produce them at that, in that period of time. So,
Yeah, I think if we can understand sort of where staff is going to need us. If at this point it's just quarters instead of months, that's fine, just to get some insight. I think it'll give us some idea of sort of when it's going to be busy, but also when it's going to be slow, and we can use those slow times for the educational opportunities in between.
Gotcha.
But I think if we can get that published, that'd be great.
So we'll try to figure it out because some of the things that I think you're asking about, so for example, infrastructure funding and things like that, we may need to get, I'm gonna call it assistance, from, let's say, our Public Works Department, because they will have a lot more information on those topics, so we just need to make sure that the availability is there, you know, for when we want to meet and service the information. I will say right now is probably the slowest time for us, is for finance, once we get into January timeframe, that's going to be our start to work on the budget. So that's going to be a full swing for us as well on that level. So as I mentioned, when we do mid-year update for the budget, in the past, we have brought it up to the update as well to the commissioners to be able to look at. Again, depends on the timing, how quickly we have it. It either goes, you know, right at about the same time as the council. Sometimes it might fall a little behind because, like I said, it depends on the timing, so. But we'll,
Let's talk about next month.
Okay.
Is that pretty open at this point in time?
is it pretty open for us?
Do you have any agenda items to bring?
Not at the moment.
Okay, so, I mean, if it's all right with the rest of the council, can we talk about expenditures next month?
We can probably talk about certain expenditures. I'm not sure if I will have all the information to speak on all expenditures.
I mean, I think a summary like this for expenditures would be helpful. If that's not, I don't know how much I'm asking.
Right, yeah, is this feasible? And like also like to project 3 months ahead, like what we may talk about, is that feasible? Because I don't know if it's reasonable, like it should only be something I think we should request. If it
He
makes
wants to know
sense.
which ones he can miss and which one he has to do.
I'm going on vacation.
Okay? We all have one line there? Great, thank you. Final opportunity for public comment. Motion to adjourn,
Motion to adjourn.
second.
Second.
Anyone opposed? Thank you.